I think that it is entirely too early for me to be making a tier list and claiming that I can say with some degree of certainty or authority that this is the way the game is played right now. So why the heck am I making this video? Well, for one thing, I have a lot of thoughts about the metagame, and it's hard to kind of split those into individual videos because I think it's a lot more thorough to be able to talk about what the landscape of all of the different weapons is, how they interact with each other, and that I feel is easiest to address by going through each of the weapons one by one and talking about how they each deal with the individual circumstances that they find themselves in. So this is partly a talking through my understanding of the metagame right now video. Another reason is that these videos tend to stimulate a lot of discussion, and I always learn things from those discussions. A lot of the time, I say something about someone's favorite weapon, and then they get angry at me because they feel like I'm misrepresenting it, and then I get to learn from that angry nerd. So hopefully I get to make some nerds angry, and I get to learn from those angry nerds. I want to start by talking about the general state of things, the reason that things have shaken out the way they have so far, the challenges that we're dealing with right now, and the solutions that people are currently trying, not to say the solutions that they will end up landing on, but here's the way that things have changed. First of all, the West was not expecting paint spam V-heavy. Once we saw that and figured that out, that opened up a lot of experimentation. And that's not to say, you can see I don't actually have V-heavy at top tier. I don't have it there because I don't feel like it has confirmed its spot as powerful yet. We've discovered that we can do it. We haven't discovered whether we should do it. But that's not the only weapon that does that thing. Maybe to that extent, right? I haven't seen a bow hitting 4K paint, but I have seen bows frequently hit 2.5K paint, which is still a lot. Bow is quietly one of the better painting weapons in the entire game. Bow had a really poor paint pattern for swimming through, and so even though the raw paint output was very high, it wasn't favored because it didn't enable mobility as much. But a lot of painting patterns, even back then, were invented to solve that problem. Maybe it was just that all of a sudden there's a metagame where we can use that, and now people are noticing. Hard for me to say, but what I'm getting at here is that backliners paint more than they did before, which is crazy, because up until this point, we've been in pencil meta. And as you can see, I still am not convinced that any of these upstart backline weapons will totally dethrone the pencil, because the pencil synergizes so well with a playstyle of painting. Now, I think that there's a lot that has been done to push the other backliners in that respect. And it's happened very quickly. I think it was just like a couple weeks ago that Jared was watching the Area Cup that was happening at the time, and he's looking at these V-heavy paint spammers going, why are they throwing these wave breakers? I'm crashing out. Like, why are they throwing them right in front of the enemy team? They're just going to get destroyed right away. What is that doing? This is such a waste. And I'm sure now, even just over the last couple of weeks, everybody could explain, oh, they're doing that because they want it to be destroyed. Because if the enemy team destroys it, they can farm another one faster. They're not planning on like actually getting picks out of the waves or anything like that. They're just hoping to use it as a temporary point sensor, which is why they're going to throw it as close to the enemy team as possible, and they're going to try and get the enemy team to destroy it as fast as possible so they can get it again, get that ink tank refill, keep spamming paint. Like, that development is still very new, and that has opened up an entire new branch of our metagame. Because now, with all of these paint spam backliners, The bow, which could always paint very well, the pencil, which could always paint very well, V-Heavy, which we've just learned how to paint very well with. Now, all of the weapons that we're trying to run with them are radically different than the fighting meta that had been developing right up until that point. If I were making this tier list even like 2 or 3 weeks ago, I would be, on the same patch, mind you, I would be putting a whole lot more things like this bucket, this decav, the stamper, the wiper, the S-blast. I'd be putting these midline fighting weapons, these weapons that are there to just run at the enemy team and combo damage and make them dead very fast. And now what we're seeing a lot more in Western play over the last even just week and a half is a lot of extremely paint-heavy comps. We've been seeing some comps where there's only really one weapon on the comp that's like a fighting weapon, and a lot of the time you like super overload on the painting side. Like, I'm seeing Aerospray seriously being picked in some cases. I'm seeing a lot of situations where I'm like, oh, I should be able to just run through this team because none of them have the TTK on me. And those assumptions are definitely being tested right now because those paint spam kinds of teams do make it very difficult to approach them. And there are a couple of developments that have made it so that it's hard to not at least go into the game without a plan for that in mind. So let's talk about one more thing, which is also a big problem we're trying to find solutions for right now. And that is the reason that I've got the Dynamo as high as I do. This is going to make a lot of people upset because a lot of people right now are going to be saying that Dynamo is a big problem, that it is like causing issues that everyone's going to have to deal with, that it's something everyone needs an answer for. And then I have it down here in the niche tier. I'm calling this niche because there is a pairing here that is pretty formidable and that I haven't seen clear, obvious counters to yet. Again, this is very fresh, but it is combining the Dynamo with this bow, specifically this bow, the Inkline Tri-Stringer. Those two together are a lot stronger than the sum of their parts. I do personally think that bow kind of carries that pairing because the bow is what keeps the Dynamo safe from a lot of its natural predators. But because the Dynamo has the bow watching over it, it gets to play to all of its strengths and has a lot of its weaknesses mitigated, and all of a sudden that pairing becomes super strong. Dynabow, as a lot of people have been calling it, is an idea where you have a lot of paint. The Dynamo now paints like crazy. The burst paints, the cooler output on that thing is absolutely up to par with other support weapons in the game. And its paint output combined with the bow's already crazy paint output makes it very hard to approach either weapon. You're not really going to be able to get sharks off on either of these things very easily because all of the routes to them are just already going to be painted and they're going to see it coming. If a Dynamo is getting rushed down, it should have a flick ready to go, and that flick should one-shot, so it's very hard to run a frontline weapon into it if it's not distracted or if it's not getting snuck up on, and it's harder and harder to sneak up on it now that the game is going on. It is still powerful in all of the, 3 maps or whatever that you want that kind of AoE. It's still good on Humpback, it's still good on Flounder, like we've always seen it used. But now it has this protective partner with it. It's going to be able to stay out there against a lot more situations. The only thing that's really keeping me from saying this weapon is pencil food is the bow. I think the bow is the big brother that's protecting it in this pairing, and that's making it so that I can't say right now that this is like the meta. I do think that it's relatively fragile, actually, but it's catching a lot of people off guard, and I think that people are still developing answers for it. One thing that's also run a lot with that pairing is the brush. I just want to apologize to all of the brush players I've talked to in the past couple days, because it's been a lot of them. I want to apologize for them right off the bat that I asked all these questions about brushes, and then I just put them all in the niche tier. I promise there's some thought behind those, and I will get to them. But the thought process here is they've got a lot of paint to work with all of these backline weapons, and not necessarily just the Dynamo pairing either. Brushes are in one of the best states that they've ever been. The sharking playstyle works really well now. That's the way that a lot of frontline weapons are actually being played, is instead of going for fighting weapons, you're going for sharking weapons more often, because of that higher paint output on the map, and because of that greater likelihood that you're going to have some place to sit that won't get checked. So because of that, brush goes very well with it, and brush also works really well with this pairing because you're able to push forward faster than most other weapons. You're able to go through enemy ink. You're able to be independent and still be a frontline weapon, which is unusual. You know, you look at a lot of things like, you know, a short-range shooter, let's say. Short-range shooters are really powerful if you're running other weapons that want to fight with them. If all you're doing is sending a Splattershot into their base, that Splattershot is going to die. You can't do things like even a Tetra Dualies can do, which is already a weapon that dies a lot by itself. You need multiple units converging on an enemy position in coordination to make something like a shot work as an aggressive weapon. A brush, on the other hand, can kind of just go wherever it wants to, within reason. And that's something that works really well. You want independence in this bow dynamo kind of paradigm, because those weapons are not going to be moving up very quickly with you. They're going to be playing a very slow game of attrition. They're going to be waiting for things to feed into them. So having something that can go and, you know, burst scores, or something that can just suddenly take a couple of players out and accelerate the game, is huge for that. And that's something that the brush offers. And then I typically see some other very independent weapon. I've seen Nautilus used in that comp a lot, and that's something that seems to be working out really well for it. So that's a problem for which people are still finding solutions. It's very untested, and that's why I'm not saying, oh, this is the meta right now. There are a lot of these things I'm going to be talking about that are relatively untested, especially in certain combinations of weapons. We're still putting the pieces together on what the meta is actually going to be, but this is what's happening in North American lobbies right now, and so that's what we're developing answers for. And really, when you think about the term metagame, that is what that means. Here's what the game has presented us with. What solutions are we coming up with for the problems that that game poses? So, my top tier is very small. That is because we don't have a lot of answers right now, and these are the only ones that I really feel confident saying, yeah, these are probably going to be strong regardless of how all of this ends up shaking out. I've got some top contenders, things that very well might push up into that top tier with some time and development in very powerful, and really anything from this like green tier up, I could totally see breaking out and being something that defines the metagame in the next couple weeks or so. But this is what I feel like I can probably say right now I do think about the game. Will I think this in a week? 2 weeks? Hard to say, but that's where I'm at. So, long ramble aside, let's get into it. Custom Blaster. There are a lot of people who will tell you that this is the strongest weapon in the game right now. Now, that might have changed in the last little bit because of the prevalence of these high paint comps, but the beautiful thing about the Custom Blaster is that it comes with a point sensor. Point sensor makes so many problems so much less of a problem right now, because in this high paint environment we're seeing a resurgence of sharking weapons, and sharking weapons get spotted by the Custom Blaster. And it's really easy for the Custom Blaster to deal with them too. Like, if you see a Carbon Roller, for example, usually that's still a problem even if you know where they are, because, okay, they're under that ledge. How do you get over that ledge? But the blaster has a response to that. It has AoE. It can target that player, and that player might not be able to see it quite as well as it can see them. So, really strong weapon at finding things and being able to deal with those tricky sharking weapons. It's a really good slaying weapon in general. You know, the main weapon does get picks pretty reliably, especially once you start hitting directs. And I can't believe I'm saying this as someone who played Splatoon 2, but Splashdown is pretty strong right now. It's not the easiest thing in the world to take a Splashdown out. Even if you do take out the player, you're often trading yourself for it unless you have a really long-ranged weapon to do that with. And it's something that also has a tendency, when it works, to get multi-kills. And multi-kills are only more incentivized now, not like we weren't trying to get these before, but now you get a speed boost for having those multi-kills, right? You get aura for getting enough of those. This is one of the best aura farming weapons in the entire game. You get multi-kills frequently, especially in a case where you're not running quite as many fighting weapons. So if this is your one fighting weapon, this is the one that's most likely to be slaying. You're much more likely to get aura on this thing. And on top of that, once you have aura, you continue getting aura when you get assists off of your point sensors. It's not as much as you would get from actually hitting the player, but also you have AoE to hit the player with, so that's going to contribute to it a lot too. So this benefits a lot from those new mechanics. It also benefits a lot, from the HP bars, because now you can see when you can combo your damage to splat someone, and you know how to take risks better. It also benefits from the changes to the hitbox sizes. Blasters got a really big buff in that regard, so if you're shooting, especially at a player who's standing up out of the ink, that is a much easier shot than it used to be. So there's just a big confluence of factors from the most recent patch, from the state that the game is in, that makes this weapon just... It feels like playing the game on easy mode sometimes. Like, I was playing a scrim at one point, and I was like, hey, I haven't played Blaster in probably like 2.5 years competitively, but I feel like it's the best answer to this problem. And it was. It was exactly what we needed in that particular moment, and this is from someone who doesn't play the weapon. I'm a big believer in comfort on weapons, that's a really important factor. It didn't matter here. The weapon was just strong enough that I did that anyway. The only other time that I've had an experience quite like that was when we first figured out that Snipewriter was really strong. I remember my teammate was a bamboo one-trick for a while, and one day we decided, hey, let's see if we like Snipewriter. Literally the first time that he tries Snipewriter, he's like, I just feel like I'm doing better with this weapon. I'm just going to stick to this. It was that kind of experience for me on Sea Blaster. I haven't stuck to it because I have a Blaster teammate, and so I need to provide a little bit more paint support and be a little bit more independent, but I definitely would be playing a lot more Sea Blaster if I weren't in the comp environment that I am right now. I just think it's a very, very strong weapon. Decav, I don't think is going anywhere. This weapon only got buffed by the changes. The hitbox size is somehow even bigger, which is... It was already dumb how big this hitbox was, but for whatever reason, now it's larger than it was, and that's only going to make it stronger. Big Bubbler is still everything it always was. There are definitely a lot of answers out there right now to Big Bubbler because this weapon has been around for as long as it has, and there are some talks that maybe it's falling out of favor because the fighting weapon meta is just not quite as much what it was. However, I have also seen this weapon be like the one fighting weapon that people try to play on their teams and still be perfectly successful there, because I think the name of the game for a fighting weapon right now is independence, is being able to do stuff on its own, not being super reliant on teammates to take fights with it, being able to poke and get out, being able to have tools to wall enemy players or angles off. Stuff like that is really valuable right now, especially with the paint situation being what it is. So I think that that's still not going away. Also, I would just like to point out that this weapon already has pretty decent range, but that it has a dash that allows its melee hitbox to cover Splash-o-matic range. Just want to put that out there. Like, a Splash-o-matic cannot splat you with its main weapon from the range at which this can hit you with a melee range one-shot. the dash is insane, and I just need to make sure everybody knows that. Snipewriter. This is the least confident that I am in a top-tier weapon right now because of the big shakeup that's been happening in the backline. What tends to happen in North American Splatoon is we get an idea, and then we experiment with it, and it's only after we've been experimenting with that for about 4 to 6 weeks, and people have had to come up with counters to it, that we see whether that thing is actually strong, or if it was just something that we didn't have an answer for yet. And right now, we're still in that phase of figuring out with the heavy and the bow and everything. I am hedging my bets. I'm thinking that they're strong, but I also could see pencil just kind of coming back a lot more. I could see it being the case that a lot of the players that we're seeing try these new options might decide, okay, now that I have a couple weeks of muscle memory on it, I feel like I want this sometimes and this other times. I think that the combination of the paint output, which is matched by other weapons, but the paint output plus the painting range, which is somewhat matched by other weapons, combined with the cooler output, which is not matched by any other weapon. I think those 3 pieces of utility put together is a little bit more efficient in a comp than you can find in most other places. There's a reason that we have Dynamo plus bow as a combination there. It's that we get the painting range and the ability to help out in fights from the bow, but then we get the big AoE and the cooler output from the Dynamo. There's AoE on the bow, of course, and I'm not glossing over that fact. I think that is one really powerful aspect of the bow. That's the reason that it's kind of able to protect a little bit better against something like a pencil, which is otherwise very much a bully. I think that we come out on the pencil side right now. That's my prediction, but that could shift over time, and that's why this is the lowest on my top tier list. In very powerful, so this is not like big, huge, meta-defining, has an answer to everything, but there are very many comps where this sort of thing works. It has a lot of tools that demand very strong answers. Bucket is not as popular right now in North America, but there are just so many Bucket players in Japan that are doing such crazy things with it. We're seeing it so prevalently, especially in things like Area Cup. And I think that it's just a matter of, like, we need someone who's, like, one-tricking specifically this Bucket and trying to push it mechanically as hard as they can. I think, like, someone like that will still be fine on this weapon. Now, it's not an easy weapon. It's a weapon that demands a lot of discipline and a lot of recognition of the situation, because you really can get locked into your slow fire rate with this weapon worse than most other things. It doesn't paint for itself to move super well. It paints high output in that it puts a lot of your color paint on the enemy side with the way that its hitbox is shaped, but you have to position extremely carefully. It jumps a lot while it's attacking. It's very easy for this thing to get its feet painted and get rushed down. So you do have to be careful. Now, it has very consistent damage on someone who's around it by flicking the aim around. It doesn't have very fast damage, and that's something that makes it a lot scarier to try and play in current meta when there's a lot of sharks sitting around. So I dropped this down from the top tier where I probably would have put it during fighting meta, but I'm also very reluctant to completely remove it. Like, it still has bomb combos, its special paints a lot, which is really valuable for it right now, and the AoE ability of this weapon is in a lot of ways more useful than with basically any other kind of AoE because of the way that it lets you hit over the top of stuff. This kind of a weapon is a backliner's nightmare if it gets underneath you, and there's some positions where you kind of just can't fight it, and you have to leave or you will die. So, still very strong, not quite in the position of power it used to be, but I don't think it's been a fall from grace per se. The support dapples. I think beacons are incredibly powerful right now. There are a lot of kind of wall comps that it's hard to push in against, and so putting beacons down there makes it so that you want to push into enemy territory, but it feels kind of unsafe to do so, especially since if you go and try to take out those beacons, for example, now you know there might be this weapon with what everyone's been calling a like 10 frame teleport that has a very, very fast TTK and could just delete you for trying to do that. On top of it, this is a weapon that gives you cooler output, which may free your backliner up. And since we've been considering a lot of backlines other than pencil right now, this has emerged as a potential candidate for replacing that role, one that also gets them back faster, not just because of the Tacticooler, which is already huge, but because of the beacons. So, beacons also synergize very well with Tacticooler. Everyone these days is getting better and better at super jumping back into play from out of a fight instead of super jumping back to spawn. A lot of the time you'll like remember the D-pad input for your backliner, or you'll just check the map really quickly and jump to someone who's in a safe position instead of trying to go back to spawn, and that keeps you in play while nevertheless getting you out of a situation that you would have otherwise lost. So that's also really powerful in the current state of the game. The 52 gal being up here is maybe a little bit of personal bias, because this is the weapon that I have been hard focusing for a long time here, but I don't think so, because I think a lot of people are starting to switch over to it. This weapon did not need to get buffed the way that it did on that earlier patch where it got the projectile speed. Like, that was entirely unnecessary. It was already, I think, the single weapon in the game, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think it's the single fastest weapon in the game from when you hold down the ZR button the first time to when it splats someone. Obviously, you know, releasing charge on a charger is a very fast TTK, but you have to charge it first, right? From pressing the ZR button to splatting someone, I think this is the fastest weapon in the game at doing that. And it got faster because the bullets travel faster now. I don't get it. It didn't need that. On top of that, now on any of the weapons, your hitboxes are bigger, and that offsets its biggest weakness, which is the inconsistent aiming. The shot spread on it. That RNG is going to be offset somewhat, because if the hitbox is bigger, you can miss by more and still have the projectile make contact. So it's only been buffed so far, and one of the things that really sets this weapon apart from the other short-range shooters is its relative independence. This is one of the only weapons that is a shooter, a short-range shooter right now, that you can put on like a flank angle, you can put on the weak side of the map, and it can hold its own there. It's not going to just get run down right away, because you have to deal with the wall. The wall stops one angle of attack. You can't just flank it. And if you try to attack it from the angle that it's left open, you still have to deal with, again, one of the fastest slaying weapons that has ever been in any of these games. So now you've got something that you can actually just put out there wherever it is that you need to place it, and have a significant amount of impact from there. That's kind of the way that we've been using it so far. That's the way that I've been kind of seeing it played when I've been watching people like Kiver who have been playing it. People like Synapse has been playing a little bit more of Blaster recently, but even so, there's been a lot of 52 experimentation at the very least recently, and I think that uptick is in response to the weapon just being stronger than it's been before. This is, like I said, been my main weapon for a little while now, even though I'm more experienced on other stuff. Heavy we've already talked about quite a bit. Paint spam is making it so that it can hold areas better than it's been able to before. Now, the thing about the heavy is that it needs its position to be stable. And it's good at stabilizing what's in front of it with its paint, but this is also a very targetable weapon. This is a weapon where if you are able to get in and take this thing out, your team really kind of collapses if its whole goal is to have this thing just be paint spamming. You need some other source of paint if you don't want your comp to be fragile, and that is, I think, where Pencil is in a little bit better of a position, because a lot of the time Pencil is the one who is targeting these shorter range backline weapons like the heavy and trying to force them out of position. It's kind of the Aerospray problem where, sure, painting is important, but if you can't get to the place you're trying to paint safely, if you're just going to get shot for doing that, that doesn't help you. Painting range matters so that you can reach those places, and fighting ability also matters. Now, where the heavy succeeds that the Aerospray fails is that it absolutely can fight. Like, any other weapon that does not outrange it should usually lose to this thing because it's just got a very high fire rate and a pretty significant damage output for it. And it can spray for a pretty long time. So it's something that you can rush down, but you have to be tricky about it. If you can rush it down, that's a huge strategic loss for the enemy team. They really need to kind of back up and regroup if they lose that kind of support out on the map, if they've been counting on that as part of their comp. And so, while it's definitely powerful and we're seeing a lot of it, I am also hesitant to put it into top tier yet without more results, because I do feel like we're early in the days of trying to experiment with how to beat this thing, and I feel like people are going to figure out how to target it in a way that will make it a lot harder for it to play the game. 96, we haven't talked about a ton here. There are a lot of weapons I'm going to put out here on this list that I'm putting there because they're VAC weapons, and I think VAC is insanely busted right now and is heavily underexplored. Now, I think part of the reason it's underexplored is because the weapons that it's on are definitely not ideal. I think if you put this on some kind of like short-range shooter or something, or something that's going to farm it fast, something that's going to want to play from that range, we might be telling a different story here. You know, it might be something that just gets used a lot, but 96 is still in a pretty good spot. It didn't get the projectile speed buff that the 52 got, but it still does benefit from the bullets having bigger hitboxes, so that offsets its accuracy problem. And basically the way this thing is going to play anyway is as what they call a vac merchant. It's going to sell you vacuum cleaners over and over again, and it's going to make a lot of money doing so. This is one of the fastest ways in the game to get the ink vac, and getting ink vac means that you get to just win whatever fight is going on when the vac gets popped. And that's insanely powerful. As a 52 gal player who has been the beneficiary of many a ink vac, it turns a fight from something where I could get splatted to a trivial training room drill where I don't have to worry about my feet getting painted. I don't have to worry about any incoming fire. I can just shoot the player as though they are a target dummy. And that's something that we all practice doing an awful lot because we sit in the waiting room a lot waiting for matches to start. That's just crazy to be able to do. That is free picks, and on top of that, once the free pick has been gotten by shielding your frontliner who started a fight, now you also get this giant AoE shot that can very easily get splats by itself or neutralize zone or do any number of other different things that are really hazardous to the enemy team's health and ability to win the game. So farming Vac is definitely a viable strategy that we're seeing in a number of places. And if it happens to be a strong map or mode for Vac, this is often the weapon that people are going to try and get it. Then we have talked about Inkline Tri-Stringer quite a bit. The thing about this weapon is that it just has a lot of uptime. It takes up a lot of the map and a lot of the attention of the enemy team by not just putting the arrows on the ground, by not just threatening the ranged damage, by not just threatening backliners out of the way, but also by putting super chumps out and then doing all of those things while the chumps are out. There's so much area denial potential here. You're going to get a lot of assists off of this. There are a lot of weapons that are very strong right now that combo well with the number of the damage numbers of the number of arrows you shoot. So pairing this with any number of different things leads to some pretty frustrating results for the enemy team. I still need to see more of specifically like Tri-Stringer versus Pencil in top level play to really know which of the two is winning out. And my hunch, like I said, just for the ability to paint teammates' feet better, for the cooler output, I still feel like utility is in favor of the Pencil right now. But the bow, it has the advantage of being a cool weapon that people think is cool, that people like. That is an advantage for a weapon because it means people are going to push it. And there's been a diehard fan base for this weapon that have been pushing it for a long time, and they're starting to see the fruits of that push. And there are going to be a lot of strong Tri-Stringer players now that they've had a couple of years to get used to this thing. This is something that, unless we see nerfs to the weapon itself, is only going to get better. And so it's something to keep an eye out on for sure. The other kits we'll get to a little bit later on, but I think that this is currently the strongest of those kits, mostly because of the special. I think the special synergizes better with its playstyle than those of the other two, and so that's why I'm putting it here and the others below. Next up is a weird tier because I've been seeing so many carbons in recent competitive play. Carbon is all over the place. There's even a team of 4 Carbon Roller players that is in my Ludi division. Like, we are going to have potentially 5 Carbon players in one lobby when we play that Ludi match. And like I mentioned before, I think that has to do with the background of the backliners painting a lot, and paint always enables this weapon. It's not that like you necessarily need a super duper high paint comp for it, but the more paint it gets, the more opportunities it has to sneak in somewhere. Because the more paint the enemy team has, the more likely you are to cut corners. The more likely you are to be like, ugh, I can't outpaint all that. Let's just paint what I am able to paint, and hopefully there's no one sharking there. And that's when the Carbon takes advantage of that. So Carbon is very strong right now. The problem, number one, I mean, there were some nerfs to Zuka. I think I probably overreacted a little bit to those nerfs to Zuka initially, partly because during fighting meta, I didn't want to run as weak of a fighting weapon as the Splattershot, but also I don't think that the nerf to the like hitbox or anything is making that big of a difference for how it's used and how effective it is. It changed some of the really busted, annoying stuff about it, but I still think that the weapon functions largely the same as it has. So Zuka isn't as bad as I thought it was going to be. But the one thing that makes me hesitate to put this any higher is the fact that if you have a point sensor, this weapon is so much less scary. It's like knowing how, like, exactly how the horror movie is going to end. It's like knowing, okay, they're about to scare us right now. Like, it's just so night and day between not knowing where this thing is and knowing where this thing is. And point sensor is such a huge radius right now on maps that often have very narrow choke points that it's not the hardest thing to just chuck a couple point sensors out there and know where pretty much everyone relevant on the enemy team is, including the carbon. They have to be so careful to skirt around these things. And I think that that is a problem that I don't immediately have like a simple solution for. It's something I feel like you kind of just have to account for by protecting the carbon more than enabling the carbon from that point forward. So running into that seems like a difficult problem to deal with for it, and that makes me hesitate to put it any higher. But I also do think that when it is usable, it's certainly above the weapons that I've put it above, so that's why it ends up in this weird limbo area. The Nautiluses, I think, have been bullied out of play in a lot of cases by longer range backline weapons. Because it's pretty easy to bully those when the backliner starts looking at it. Pencil in particular is just really oppressive against something like this, having to get as close as it does. But in basically every situation where you can run a Nautilus, it's a terrifying weapon. It's something that just really reliably holds its ground. It's something that can still paint a decent amount when it decides to paint. It's something that has point sensors, which it can use to find those sharking weapons. It's something that has splashdown, which if you get on top of it to try and shark it, it can just pop that and try to at least go for a trade or something to, tip the scales in your favor. It's a really hard weapon to push out of the way. And so I still think that it's strong. Just, again, there are a lot of counters to it that you want to run it when the enemy team doesn't have those counters. And then I think you'll see a lot of success, but otherwise it loses a lot of its value. Okay. This is a pretty large category, and the next category is larger still. That, I think, is a reflection of how undeveloped our idea of the metagame is right now. I think that any of these weapons could have breakout ideas form around them, and these could suddenly form the core of what we decide is a meta comp. But I'm not sure which ones those are going to be right now, so I'm just going to kind of list them all and talk about why I'm putting them lower. Stamper, I think, has had its most significant fall from grace in a little while because we're just not seeing a lot of success from a Zipcaster these days. Zipcaster is a lot harder to use. I think part of the reason for that, not all of the reason, but part of the reason is health bars, and part of the reason is also the hitbox changes, where if you're not in Squid form, you're easier to hit, and you're out of Squid form to use Zipcaster. So it's easier to hit you, and now one of the most frustrating things of fighting a Zipcaster has always been understanding whether you hit them and whether the damage applied. Because for one thing, they're just moving very fast, so it's easy to think that your shot was on when it wasn't. And secondly, there was this armor mechanic that, because of latency, sometimes you felt like you got the hit and sometimes you felt like you didn't. Now you just kind of know. Did I hit them? Did I not hit them? Can I take a risk and go after them? Should I just continue taking cover or moving around evasively? Like, those are much easier questions to answer now, and every single Zipcaster weapon is hurting for it. This was the premier Zipcaster weapon. I still don't want to put it lower than the other Stamper because having Burst Bomb is incredibly powerful for it. It's a damage combo that none of the other kits of this have, and that's making me want to consider it anyway. Then I have the Booyah Bomb one, which is the one that I think I'm seeing the most common, just off the top of my head competitively right now. I think people are liking it for its ability to use the Booyah as a continuation special after it gets picks, because the nice thing about the Splatanas is how forgiving their hitboxes are. It's a very reliable splat, just like how the sloshing machine was in the beginning of the game. Since it's reliable, you can really count on someone being able to do that consistent damage. That makes it so that you put this at the mid-range and you have a really reliable wall, and you know whether it's going to be overrun or not. It's not going to come down to a really challenging execution check like it would on something like a blaster or even a shooter that has to aim a lot more precisely to get their fast time to kill. Wiper is one of the better skirmisher weapons right now. Again, Chara just had to make a video recently explaining that weapons do not play just individual roles, and I've been trying to express that ever since I explained the roles first. It still seems to be something that's not getting through to people. You do not call a weapon a skirmisher by itself, but this is one of the best weapons at skirmishing, at that task that is not the only thing that you do for the entire match. Okay, we're moving on. Hammer is also in a pretty decent spot right now, where it's throwable as this really big AoE nuke that does even more damage than it used to. I just... Recalibrating when the hammer got changed and its hitbox got even bigger was so weird, because it's like, I know for a fact that that hammer will not make contact with my Inkling, and yet I need to get into my head that it will still splat me. That was so frustrating. Rushdown mode is very not great the stronger the players get. At lower levels, Rushdown mode can absolutely be a great entry tool that is hard for people to mechanically deal with. You get to a point, though, where unless it's like narrow corridor and the only place you have to go is back behind you, you probably are not going to get stuck. You're probably going to be able to kite this thing. You're probably going to be able to shoot it if all it does is use rushdown mode. It's going to have to be a lot more tricky about doing things like swimming the hammer up to you and then jump swinging to start rushdown, or it might just have to cut its losses and throw the thing early on to try and get like a Monozuka. But regardless, it is something that attracts a lot of enemy attention, which is exactly what you want this weapon to be doing. If you put this through on, say, the left side of Hagglefish and especially get a hammer from the side, that's a really scary prospect, and it has been for the entire course of the game. This is a weapon that is one of the most maneuverable in the game. It's one of the most independent weapons in the game. It can paint a line for itself to swim through more efficiently than just about anything else. And it moves a lot while it's firing, which makes it harder to hit, makes it so that it can reposition around corners and things like that while still dealing damage. And it paints pretty decently. On top of that, it has a location tool, which is very valuable, like we've mentioned, in current meta. It has a torpedo that can say, oh, hey, by the way, there's a sharking weapon right here that nobody spotted. And that's incredibly valuable in case it's about to enter enemy territory, which it's going to be doing often. I just hit the spacebar with my hand. Very cool. Next, we've got S-Blast. This might be higher. This might still be in the position of power that it was once in. I feel like the location ability of the Sea Blaster is something I'm going to more often these days. So I'm torn on it. The fact that it has a burst bomb to combo with, and the fact that it hits at the range it does at the speed it does, is still kind of ridiculous. This is still something that is determining the way that a lot of people play the game. Like, how can I deal with an S-Blast? Okay, I need this kind of tool. And so I might be underrating it. Just, I've been seeing a lot less of it since we've left fighting meta. And so it's kind of like on the cusp, and I'm waiting to see more information before I really assert that I think it's stronger. Tri-Nouveau has had a huge glow up. I think people are liking the combination of the AoE and the fighting power with the cooler, because a lot of the weapons that are shorter ranged that have cooler are seeing play right now, because we've got these other alternatives to pencil that are being seen for the first time in a long time. So I think that Tri-Nouveau, for people who have a bucket and don't have another viable candidate to run the cooler, it's become a lot more popular, and that's why we're seeing more of it. Crab has also benefited a lot recently from just the health bars. It makes it so that you know your damage combos a little better. It's also benefited a lot from the fact that we're moving away from that fighting meta idea, that it's a lot more paint reliant, a lot more area denial reliant, and Crab is the ultimate area denial special. For 8 or 9 seconds or whatever it is, you cannot enter that open sight line, or it will combo you rather quickly, and it will know how better to combo you now because it can see what your HP is. So Splash has only gotten a glow up from that, and Dualies have only gotten a glow up from that, although one of the main proponents of the weapon in the West right now is Jared, and Jared has been deciding to move away from it from what I've been seeing him say recently. He said something about not liking the 1v1 matchup against S-Blast, something not liking kind of the startup time on the dodge rolls and how committed they are. So it might be something that we see fading a little bit with time. I'm still putting it up here. I don't see it being like a terrible choice by any means, just it might be something that we're moving away from more towards like a Splash, which is going to have a little bit more on the paint and area denial side, a little bit less on trying to like dive the enemy team. Splattershot, I thought I was going to be putting lower on this list, and then the more I've been playing it recently, the more I'm like, no, actually, it wasn't great in the fighting meta earlier, but it's getting better now that things like bombs are in such short supply. Because we do actually have a bomb on this, although it's not a super fast bomb like we get on our nice T-Tech over here. But no bomb, no bomb, no bomb, no bomb, no bomb. No bomb, no bomb. Get some burst bombs down here. You get a torpedo, but it's like there just aren't that many lethal bombs in the metagame right now, in those weapons that are seeing a lot of play. Also no bomb, right? So I've been playing it a little bit more recently and being like, man, bombs are really good. I forgot. Because there's so few weapons we're using right now that have them. But that's something that I've been seeing some success with recently. The lower TTK is the main reason that I felt it got pushed out, that and slightly lower range than a lot of the weapons have been having. If you get run at by like Bucket S-Blast, Range Blaster, even something like a Pro that's aiming well, or a Wiper, like, it can be hard to play the shot into that just because you're getting range diffed. Like, yes, you could get on top of them and splat them that way, but getting on top of them is not necessarily an easy thing to do with the map design being what it is. So, a lot of the time with the shot, the main reason I was bringing it out was for something like Crab Leg, where I needed a tool that could reliably clear the grates with a short-ranged weapon attached to it. And the Trizuka is still one of the best answers to that. It's still something that I like taking if I think there's going to be a crab. So it's definitely a tool in my arsenal. It's not the one that I'm focusing on the most right now, but I've been moving more toward it just because of my own comfort with it as well. Zap is also making a bit of a comeback for the same reasons we've talked about before with the Tri Nouveau. The more we pick things that are not pencil, the more all of the other cooler options are going to become attractive, because we need something that isn't a backliner, that isn't taking up that role on the comp, but that can still give us a good cooler output. Speaking of which, 96. It is a cooler weapon that is a midline weapon instead of a short-range shooter, or a short-range bucket, I guess, or Dapples. All of those are short-range. It's in between that range and the range of a backliner. So if you want a midliner that's giving you cooler, you're probably picking this, or maybe you're picking this down here. T-Tech, I think, is really solid again for just having a Splat Bomb. Splat Bomb is a very, very good sub-weapon. And just the fact that this weapon has it in combination with its ability to throw strikes, it can set things up for other weapons on the team. It can force them into difficult positions. This synergizes really well with other area denial stuff that's going on in the game. If there's a bow shooting one side and then you throw a bomb at the other, where do they go? So that kind of a play style could be making a comeback here. I think back to like the high backline paint special spam kind of meta that we ended up in the end of Splatoon 2, and a lot of people are hoping that we don't end up there again, because that was definitely not a beloved metagame. But as things trend more in that direction, you're going to start seeing things that resemble the Kensa Splattershot. Something that can throw a lot of bombs, puts down a lot of paint, can move in when it wants to, but also does a lot of area denial to set up those pushes before it does to make sure that it's safe. And this is... these two weapons between the two are the closest I think we have in the game to that Kensa Splattershot kind of playstyle right now. The pros had a moment in the sun there where one of the preferred support weapons for the fighting meta comps was the Frozen Pro, where you liked the missiles for the vision, you liked the fighting range and the ability to combo with other weapons from the main weapon, and again, Bomb, very nice, sets up fights well. So it was doing very well. The meta has shifted recently, and it's favoring a lot more high paint output. I don't find as much value out of these as I saw before, because since you're running fewer fighting weapons, having a weapon with a relatively slow TTK like this does, compared to something like, say, a 52, which is almost the same range, having something like that just doesn't feel... It feels like you have to do more in other parts of the comp to compensate for that. Like, if you've got a painting backliner, and you've got a high painting support weapon... slotting this in as well, or slotting this in instead of the higher paint support weapon, it feels like it's taking up a slot on the comp that's a little bit more valuable than it used to be. But we have also in the West been looking with awe at Chocopero pushing this whole line of weapons and doing insane things with it in, say, solo queue. It's difficult to make the argument that it's not a viable weapon, and I don't think it's really going to drop far below this until they start doing things like messing with its ink efficiency or damage or something. So it's not a bad weapon for sure, but it also feels like more of like a placeholder weapon. Like, we just need a crab on this, and we don't have another way to put someone on a crab than to put them on a pro. Like, we don't want to put them on a splash because we need more range. It's like if you want a little bit of fighting range, decent paint, plus one of these very powerful specials, you just put someone on a pro and call it a day. But if you're trying to design a comp from scratch and you're trying to build a steady team, I don't see a lot of teams trying to build it around having a pro player. A lot of the time, this is more of like a patch you put on a comp than it is something that you're specializing in on purpose. This is one of my more, I think, hot takes. I've been seeing a lot of Tent with the Zuka. I think that's probably still the more popular kit from what I've seen right now. My bias toward VAC and beacons individually is also leading me to think that this Tent belongs in the same conversation and that people should be considering it. I think that V-Tent, the ability that it has to keep itself and its teammates alive is just crazy. I think that, like, going back to the deep dive I did on Hyperdive, one of the things that amazed me was the way that Infa's Tent was able to keep itself alive in 1v3s, to keep letting its teammates jump in. The vac on people's jumps, the vacs to start fights, the vacs to hold fights that were going south otherwise. They use vac a lot, and it has impact that I'm starting to realize now that I've seen it used in that context. Now, again, I'm not saying that I think Hyperdive is meta per se, but I do think that the capability of this weapon to hold positions and not get pushed out of them is valuable. I think it's weirdly an anchor in a lot of ways. I think that all of that put together in the state that the game is in makes it so that people should be considering that kit a little bit more than I've seen so far. But Tent Mains, I'm sure, can write you an essay on why I'm wrong, and I would love to read that essay. Please send it to me if someone sends it to you. K-Luna is a choice that a lot of V-Blaster players will make depending on the map. Like, maybe someone just wants a hammer, maybe someone wants a little bit more AoE and a little bit less range just based on the geometry. There are a lot of reasons why you might say, okay, we don't really need the point sensor here, and if this is going to give us any value, let's switch over to this. So it's definitely not I almost see it as kind of like this second kit on a good weapon idea that I've got for this tier here. Part of this tier is this is niche. You need to use it in specific comps or something like that, or specific map modes. But part of this is also this is a good weapon. Therefore, this is at least a somewhat good weapon, because all the time that you're putting into learning this weapon is going to translate mostly into learning this weapon. And I think that this is almost like another kit of the main blaster for a lot of people. So that's kind of the way that I see it right now. I think both of the Rapid Pros, both of these two Rapid Pros, are seeing a decent amount of use. This one has fallen out of favor a little bit just because its cooler output is lower. I don't think it's bad, though. I think like if you have a lot of ability to play blaster on someone and nobody else is picking cooler, this is totally a valid pick. I just also don't see a reason why people are picking it outside of like a team or comp specific thing. I don't think you like build this into a comp on purpose. I think that you pick it because it's a good adaptation to the resources you have available at that time. These two, I could see someone actually building an intentional comp around. This one for Inkvac, this one for its ability to see everything and to be able to poke from much longer range if it's being outranged by a backliner. The Rapid Pros have traditionally been something that you use to counter the ultra backline weapons like your E-Leaders and your Pencils, where it will bully everything else on the team, but because you can ledge this and ledge it from a very far distance away using the AoE blast radius, the Rapid Pros have a little bit of a fighting advantage against them that can sometimes give you the edge that you need to get them off your teammates. So that's got its rock, paper, scissors, where the Pencil kind of ignores and outpaints the Rapid Pro. The Rapid Pro stops the E-Leader from ever firing shots, and the E-Leader kills the Snipewriter before the Snipewriter can kill it. That's a really rough rock, paper, scissors. It's more of like a Fire Emblem kind of thing where, yeah, I mean, the swords do have the advantage against the axes, but also if the axes land a hit, the swords still die. Same kind of thing here. They are maybe like 55-45 in all of those matchups. I wouldn't say that they're like so dominant against any of the ones that they have an advantage over that it's impossible for the other to win if you pick the right one, but there is a little bit of that dynamic going on between them. This is probably crazy to a lot of people. A lot of people are like, Gem, you are dumb and don't play backline. You should not be saying things about this. But I say this because we've been trying it out a little bit on my team, and we're not really landing on it right now, but it was surprisingly successful. And again, I think it's because of Inkvac. I think Inkvac is more powerful than people are giving it credit for right now. I want to see more people trying it. And this was a surprisingly good way to get Inkvacs and to have the kind of pressure on the map that an Inkvac provides. Like, this is a weapon that's going to be aware of where fights are going on around the map. It's going to have a bit of mobility to be able to move itself to those. And if it's getting rushed down, it can always pop the vac, but otherwise it's just going to have a constant spray of fire on it. Like, there's a lot of advantages to this particular kit, I think, that overcome the issues with the main weapon that people have on Ballpoint to some degree. If you have a Splatling main, definitely give it a try. Like, I think you might be surprised at how well this is doing. E-Leader, I talked about the kind of backline trifecta right now. E-Leader is not as popular at the moment just because of how much downtime it has. In the downtime that the E-Leader has, all of these other backliners are painting so much. So I could see there being a world where E-Leader is still a top tier, but you have to hit every shot. Or like, you have to be slaying very disproportionate to what the other backliner is doing with that paint, because otherwise you kind of just lose a lot of ground really quickly. So very, very high skill floor to make this thing work. I could still see it being completely viable if you're hitting those shots. But anytime there's an if, I do factor that in a little bit. I still consider skilled players, but skilled players miss shots still. So this is something that I'm like, yeah, I don't know. Skilled players also, especially at the top level, even if they don't miss shots they're given, players know how not to give them shots. And you kind of have to play around the impact that they have by being scary, not necessarily by actually hitting things. This Charger, I don't know how much I stand by it being quite this high up, but it has VAC, and I want more people to play VAC, so I moved the VAC weapons up. That's my motive for this. That's my evil agenda. V-Roller sharking weapons, like I've said, are back in, and this is a really nice little bit of extra independence that it has by having a big bubbler. So it's certainly in a strong position for itself right now. I think that's something that we'll still see a decent amount of from the few people who actually one-trick these. A lot of people have been playing Carbon, but I think that this is a valid swap if you want like the bubble or something like that. We've already kind of talked about the Stampers, but Crab is very strong right now. Like we said, Area Denial. This is a much more passive kit than the other two. A lot of the time you try to play a Stamper as a fighting weapon, but this is more of like a zoning weapon, more of like a you need to feed into me kind of thing. It's like, this is weird to say, but it feels closer to like how a Dynamo plays than it does to how like these weapons play. So you have to think about it a little bit differently, especially with the positioning you want to be in for the Crab, which Crab on this weapon, it feels not quite as redundant as in some cases, but it's like your weapon already is the same range as a heavy Splatling. So the extra range isn't exactly what you're playing for. It's mostly just like the uptime and the fire rate and the damage combo. So probably less used than the others will be, but if you're a Stamper player, like, you're going to know all of the kits and you're going to have an idea of when you want to play which. Range Blaster is moving up a little bit in my estimation. And this might be biased just because I'm playing with a Range Blaster on my team right now, but I think that one of the big things that is powerful about specifically the custom range is the Kraken. Kraken, it's not great by itself. I don't think that, like, ignoring this one factor of it, it's a strong special, but it counters every other special in the game. And there's a lot of HP specials being used. There's a lot of, like, Big Bubbler. There's a lot of things like Ink Vac. There's a lot of stuff that is hard to contest. And this special does not care. It just runs straight at it and goes for it. Kraken is something that can stop Rainmaker very reliably. It's something that can help you stabilize in some situations where everything has gone south in a hurry. It's also a tool that helps a weapon that doesn't have very much paint to work with. It helps that weapon get in and do something aggressive in a situation that it might otherwise just have to back up. And I think that that ability to ignore the game state, that ability to ignore the power spike that your opponents have just given themselves, is a really powerful aspect of this. So this kit is difficult to ignore, and then on places where Kraken just doesn't work very well, you kind of just switch to the V range sometimes, and maybe you get to use your special as a point sensor or something. And that location ability is definitely not something to be discounted. Obviously, it's not something you want to waste an entire special for under perfect circumstances, but if you're not going to get value out of the Kraken, might as well at least get that much. Dapples, like we talked about before, you know, having sharking weapons is better and better, and having a location tool is better and better. Reef Slider definitely took a hit, but it's not that big of a hit. See this guy here as well. So this is still viable for using the Reef Slider, especially to fight things. I think people underestimate it because they're like, oh, they nerfed it. That means it's not strong. And they're not giving quite the same distance away from it as it starts to activate. They're not playing as scared of it as they should. So that's something that is catching people off guard now that the hitboxes have changed, now that it lifts up over the top of cover. It's a little bit more dangerous as a fighting tool now, and people who are shifting to adapt to that are definitely getting a lot more success out of it. Dread is still a really solid midline kind of high paint AoE damage source. It's something that combos well with other weapons, and since it's high paint, it's playing well into current meta, which is very attrition focused, which is very, you run into me first, I kill you, and that's what lets me move forward. So I think that this is not going to go away per se. But since fighting meta is out, it's got less things to fight. And so a lot of the time you're picking this because you have a bucket player and you want a particular special. And these two specials happen to be pretty valuable, having a Reef Slider versus having a Crab. That's kind of just take your pick either way. And so we're seeing a decent number of that still. Junior is something that you might run if you want very high paint output on a team and you want Big Bubbler. It still has a little bit of fighting ability. It's not something that's going to hold its own against most of the fighting weapons, but there are fewer of those now, so that means that the Junior can come out and do a little bit more these days. So I'm putting it near the bottom of this tier. I haven't been seeing it used a lot, but I could see there being a niche for it based on things that I've been seeing other teams do. Like, I think that thing that the other team is doing with some other weapon, a Junior could definitely do too. So Squeezer is one of those weapons that is always hard to draw a beat on based on results, because you're going to see fewer people playing it because it's something that can lead to a lot of overuse injuries if you're not careful with how you play this thing. A lot of people don't want to put the time into learning how to mash, and so even though it is a powerful tool, the amount of time and the potential for, literally physically harming yourself that comes from playing this thing drives a lot of people away from it. But I do think that it's in a place where it could succeed. This is something where we tended to see this weapon also a lot of the time in these slower, more attrition-focused comps from Splatoon 2 days. And I could see it making a little bit of a resurgence if it gets some results all of a sudden and people start thinking, oh, hey, I could do that too. Dynamo, I'm being a huge hater by putting it down here, but there is a point to me being a huge hater. There's been a lot of hype around this weapon. I think this weapon is overhyped. I'm not saying this weapon is bad, but I think this weapon needs a very particular comp set up around it for its strengths to not be outweighed by its weaknesses. Even though it has better paint and, more reliable damage, it's still the slowest thing ever. And it still doesn't have that much range. It has more range, but it doesn't have that much range compared to, say, a true backline weapon. Like this, it's hard to classify because you play it kind of like an anchor, but it really feels a lot more like a midline kind of fighting weapon. And it's hard to say things about it. It's hard to classify it. It's just so different than everything else. And categories fail the further you get outside of established patterns. But I would say for sure that this weapon is being seen the most because of pairings with something like this, or because of being paired with something that offsets its weaknesses. You really need that for it to be played. And because there's so much love for Dynamo, because there's so many people who love the big honkin' thing, it will keep getting played, but I think it is being played disproportionate to its competitive viability. And I think that there are certainly weaknesses you can exploit in this thing. I think one of the things that's happening to a lot of people is they're used to being able to just rush this thing down, and that's not really something you should have ever been able to do, but certain weaknesses in the weapon made it so that sometimes it worked. Now you really need to fight it the right way. You need to actually be careful and respect it and not just run after it, except when you actually have an opening, and then you need to hit that opening. It's something where it's going to get bullied by a lot of longer ranged weapons, and it needs some kind of answer to that sort of problem. So, not to hate on it, it is something that can work in competitive Splatoon. It gets a lot of cooler output, which is the big reason that I have it here and not... Where did I put the others? Here. I put the others down here for clarification. And I don't know, maybe that's not fair. Maybe I should be putting it up in this category. I don't know. I want to be more of a hater because that makes the nerds matter and it makes them teach me more things. So we're going to go for Nerds Mad today. But I think that its utility as a cooler farmer is part of what makes this combination viable, and part of why I'm not as big of a fan of these, although chumps are stronger, so I don't know, maybe I should be putting this one up a little higher. This might be hating a little bit too much, but again, it's for content, so we're going to be a hater. Both of the bows as well. Main weapon is crazy, but I think this special suits it better. I think the Inkjet has never been a backline special. It's something that should always have been on something like a short-range shooter or a dualies, something hyper-aggressive that wants to dive backliners over the top of ledges. It wants to do T-Tech, like Splatoon 2 T-Tech or Splatoon 2 N-Parries things. It doesn't want to be setting up from like way in the back and then launching from the front. Like, you don't want to make your backliner have to cross dangerous territory to get this thing off. That has severely limited its utility. It's made it so that we have to use a lot more of these like long-range inkjets, which is never the way that inkjet was strong in Splatoon 2. It's something that we're just seeing more because of the combination of map design and the weapon pools that have it in Splatoon 3. So I think it's a little bit of a mismatch, and I'm really disappointed that we have another backline weapon that got inkjet when we could have put it on the frickin' Splattershot the whole time. Anyway, and then this is... It feels like it does certainly have a lot of impact, just a lot of small impacts all across the match. You've got your Toxic Mist, you've got your Whale. Those help, but they're not like game changer plays that you get out of those the way that launching chumps at the enemy team and taking away all of their movement options is. Chumps demand a lot of attention. Whale, it's like, okay, you might have to squid roll once or something, but you might even still be able to take a 1v1 while you're in the middle of being whaled if you've got enough space to work with. Chumps, there is really a ticking clock on how long you can not do something about it before you're going to be forced to either move your whole self out of there or start shooting right now and revealing your position and maybe getting sharked by a roller or something. So I think that Inkline is stronger right now, but a bow player will certainly have use cases for these things and ways to make them work even if they just kind of want to. Mini has had a little bit of a fall from grace recently. Part of that is just being outcompeted by the heavy Splatling because there's just so much utility in what the V-Heavy can do. And so I think a lot of players have been moving away from these, but there's still situational value in being able to have Bubble or Hammer. If you ever want either of those, then it's still an option. You just kind of now have to rethink what your backline is going to look like. Headit has also fallen. In theory, there's a lot going for it. It pumps out a lot of paint. It gets cooler. But the lack of range and the fact that all of the other backline weapons over here now paint a lot too, it makes it harder to run this into the comps that we're seeing more. Pencil especially is really scary because you just don't have any tools with this to fight a pencil. The pencil just kind of wins that 1v1 because of the range advantage that it's able to leverage. So this really needs to be positioning to fight enemy players, but also if it's the anchor, it needs to be staying safe. It gets pushed and pulled in a lot of different directions, and it's really awkward to try and fit it in right now. But it's something that you might see on teams where maybe you have a Splatling player and you need them to be getting cooler for you. And that's always going to have some value, so I wouldn't say never use it, but there are definitely better things to try and get going in your comp than to be running ahead of it. Wellstring is what all the bow players play on Rainmaker so that they can pop the shield faster, and that's about all there is to it. You see this on Rainmaker, you see this pretty much everywhere else. This Splatana, I don't see too much of a reason to use it over the other one, but I also, it's so slippery. Like, I think this is one of the hardest weapons to pin down in the entire game of Splatoon, maybe in the history of Splatoon. Like, Curling Bomb plus the mobility the Wiper already has, it's just everywhere all the time. So fast, so zippy. Not a ton of immediate kill threat, unless it has Zuka, but still, that's something really special about it that I found really fun to play around with, and I'm sure that someone who's pushing it will be able to use that to some extreme effect that would be really fun to watch. Given that you're going to have Wiper players already, it's something to at least try and at least have an idea about. Maybe if there's a situation where you would benefit more from being able to throw more hammers, maybe you just say, well, Zuka is basically throwing 3 hammers. So maybe that's kind of the thought process, but I think most of the time you're going to be just using the vanilla one. Bamboo. I feel like we would be seeing a lot of Bamboo players if it weren't for this gun. Bamboo is still quite solid. It's a midline weapon that can hold its ground really well, and someone who is able to hit shots with it, which there are plenty of, those players are really scary to try and fight against. You really have to be super honest about your positioning and take opportunities when you get them. Obviously very weak to being rushed down, but again, you're playing this weapon to zone. You're playing this weapon to stop someone from being able to rush you down. It is a very decent amount of range that it has, and against a frontline weapon, like, this thing can surprise people a lot of the time when they haven't seen it being used before. I think both of these kits are fine and synergize in different ways with the Bamboo. Leader, we talked about before. This is just a version that gets Kraken, which generally people prefer to use the special that gives a little bit more support for the team. This is more of like a I'm about to be in trouble panic button kind of idea. It's also really hard a lot of the time to get the E-Leader into position to use the Kraken aggressively because it's going to be sitting so far back as an E-Leader. So I drop it back a little bit, but there are certainly some cases, I'm sure, where an E-Leader main would be like, I think Kraken would actually be good here. And since it's the second kit on a weapon they're already playing, it ends up in second kit on good weapons tier. Charcoal, same thing, second kit on good weapons. I think a lot of the strengths of the decav are in the fact that it's a decav plus big bubbler and decav plus inkjet. Inkjet's just not super popular right now. I think a big part of that is actually the proliferation of the Dynamo, that we're seeing Dynamos all over the place right now. There's just so much AoE out there that people are having to play against that they're like, oh, why would I want to run inkjet into that? But I do think that it's still solid as a main weapon. The wall certainly lets you play in ways that the other doesn't. It gives it some survivability, gives it some independence. So it's just a question of, like, can you justify grabbing the inkjet over the big bubbler and the lethal bomb? Generally, it seemed like the answer to that competitively is you aren't going to find that, but I don't think it's bad either. End parries, like I said, Splashdown, one of the best states that it's ever been. This has the mobility of the curling bomb, which was what made end parries so powerful in early game Splatoon 2. There was a metagame where this was the best weapon in the game. Part of that was its ability to get out into mid and get a pick very quickly and be able to try and snowball from there. Now, the tool that it had to snowball from there was an inkjet, which let it immediately bypass all backline cover and just get into the enemy side and start killing things. And this doesn't have that, which is, I think, a big part of why it's not as popular. But Splashdown is not a bad replacement. It is still an aggressive special that can hit over the top of ledges, so it's not necessarily the worst. And if you're fighting against like a short-ranged weapon, might be harder for them to try and take you out of it without at least trading. So I think it's not bad, just there are probably some other options on the aggressive weapon side that you're looking for, and we're not looking for that many aggressive weapons right now because we have so much paint to output. Speaking of paint to output, Neo Splash. This is a paint bot. It does not do very much else. I much prefer these days using the T-Tech because it still puts out a lot of paint, but also has a splat bomb with which to fight things and a little bit longer of weapon range and takes fewer shots to kill, so it combos better with things. Like, there's just a little bit of a power imbalance here. But what you do maybe use this for is a situation where you need your short-range shooter to pump out a lot of paint. And I keep going back to the example of Volti from Alliance Rogue. But if I wanted to have a short-range shooter spam paint, this might actually be one of the options that I think to go to first, because of not only just the amount of paint it's putting out, but the amount of explosions, the amount of visual disruption that that's causing that can let the sharking weapons get in. So I think it's niche. This Splattershot, I want it to be so good. And it definitely is the most aggressive kit of Splattershot that's available right now. The problem is, this is a more aggressive kit and has better kill time, more reliability, more sustainability out in the normal play of the game. This weapon really depends heavily on its Kraken to keep itself safe. It wants to dive in and then get to a point where it has Kraken in the middle of the fight, pop the Kraken to be able to get out, or get a pick and then pop Kraken to escape being traded. That's kind of the way that I see it being used. Obviously, Kraken you might use to counter other specials. That's usually the way that it's going to get used in any other case, but this is a weapon where you're actually maybe going to use it as a part of the normal flow of play. It's not just a counter pick that you're making, it's something that you use as a part of the weapon. That being said, the fact that you need the special to enable that playstyle means that it's fairly limited. It's very dependent on that special. There's a lot that can go wrong in that kind of game plan. So the fact that it's not as independent for being so aggressive, the fact that you would maybe get more out of sitting back, throwing more bombs, painting more, and getting specials out of that, specials that help the rest of the team instead of just being selfish specials, it's a hard sell. But it's something that there are definitely some cases for. Like, if you need a Kraken on a short-range shooter, there it is right there. That's your option. V-Blaster we talked about. This is basically the second coming of Blaster, but with a big bubbler instead of with point sensor splashdown. It does still have a location tool in the Autobomb, which is still valuable, and that's a reason that it's seeing a lot of play. But I think that it's kind of like, what cases would you not want to use this weapon? That's when you use this weapon, and not the other way around. V-Jet, it has Vac. It gets Vac very fast. It also does not kill things very fast. It does put out a lot of paint, which, makes it somewhat competitive over here, but all of these backliners are going to kill you a lot faster than the Jet will, and so it's sometimes hard to justify running this over one of those. But it does get Vac fast. It is a backliner that paints a lot. If those are things that you need, then maybe it's got a niche. Bucket. The problem is just Zipcaster. It would be a lot lower, I think, at least one tier, maybe 2 tiers lower, if it weren't for the fact that it is the second kit on a good weapon. But because there are people who are going to reasonably put time into this, I think it's worthwhile for those players to also have one of these in case that it ever ends up being useful for some very niche reason. Tri-Slosher, the only aggressive weapon to ever get an inkjet. And I don't play it. I'm never forgiving the devs for this. I have not been seeing this in a very long time. I've been seeing some Tri Nouveau, and so maybe there's some niche use case where you pull it out because you have a Tri Nouveau player and they don't need to go cooler, but they want to play Tri still. So then maybe you go with one of these. But most of the time we're just seeing this if we're seeing a Tri at all. Otherwise, you might go to another bucket. I think the range is a big disadvantage for it. It's very exposed once it's sloshed once. Like, everyone knows where it is, and it's not like it's got a ton of tools to move very fast. Like, even something like a Carbon Roller, I think, has a longer paint trail that it makes for itself than the Tri-Slosher does. So it's a fairly slow-moving, kind of clunky thing that it gets a lot of value from being up close on people, but so does Carbon, and Carbon has a faster TTK. So I think people are going with Carbon more. 96 Deco is basically like, you have a 96 player, but they want to do something other than farm vac, so they go with this. This is a weapon that's very hard to kill. It's very independent, but it's also not going to be able to push up quite as much. It's also not going to be able to do as much. Its special is, the value you get out of it depends very heavily often on if you have another special on the enemy team you're trying to cancel. Otherwise, you kind of can set this up and have it be like a guard post for your team. It's not necessarily going to provide a lot in the way of pushing up, and it's mediocre in terms of the paint that it puts out, especially not having the sprinkler that the other kit has. So, that is not a problem that the Reflux, of course, has. The fighting ability that they gave this weapon is such a breath of fresh air for it. It is so much easier to hit one-shots on this thing. You actually have to respect it somewhat as a fighting weapon. It's not the most consistent all the time, but someone who can aim with this thing, you do have to treat it a lot smarter than you did before, and that there's a lot to say for that. We're seeing this. I want to say we're seeing this more in Turf War. Like, this is a strong painting weapon that gets a strong fighting special, and relatively independent with the range that it's got, can paint for itself in a pretty reasonable way. So I think we're seeing a lot of it there more than we are in the ranked modes. So there are some cases for it, but right now this is about as high as we're seeing a reflux, especially since there's another bow that's doing really well. Squiffer, it gets Big Bubbler. Big Bubbler is good, and there are some cases where, like, Squiffer can sit under a ledge and ledge people with its shots. That's generally considered an off-meta strategy, but it's never been bad in any of the time that it's been out there. It's always been, like, on the fringes of viability, something that, like, if you're not ready for it, it will absolutely blow you up. So definitely something that's playable, but also you really need to build a comp smartly around it so that its weaknesses, its lack of uptime, things like that get dealt with by other things. Heavy Deco, I just don't see getting played a lot because the V Heavy can paint spam so much better. But if you really need a Kraken and you have a Heavy player, well, you have a Heavy with Kraken. And maybe there are some parts of the kit there that you find useful in very specific situations. Hydra, first of all, this weapon paints a lot more than I think people assume it does. The high painting range and high fire rate do combine to a pretty decent amount of special output on these things. And I think right now they're in the conversation because of the way that the backline is trending right now. Against certain matchups, the Hydra does pretty well. It can, outrange and fight a Heavy that way, and we're seeing a lot of Heavies. It's not a terrible matchup into some of the shorter range chargers. It's hard to pick sometimes because Pencil and especially Bow still bully it pretty badly. Like, Bow is a really bad matchup for this. But if you find the right matchup to play it into, there are some cases where it's like, this might actually be the best choice for you. So I put it in niche. It's about it. I think it's seen like a little bit of an uptick in viability over the recent patch. These Dapples are the ones I'm seeing the least, but they do have a Splat Bomb. I have to consider them at least somewhat for that. But I think I would still probably rather have either the Get Everyone Back tools or the information tools that you get from having, say, the Torpedo here. Okay, now we get to the brushes. I promised our brush mains, because I talked to at least like 3 different brush players in coming up with the information for this list. And then I took like almost all the brushes and put them in the same place. And I feel terrible about that. But again, that there's nuance here aside from just where they are in the category. And I want to defend myself with that. So first of all, every one of these paintbrush kits, I've developed a high appreciation for them because they're all radically different playstyles that all can work for the weapon. Like, none of these are bad. They're all at about the same level, just vastly different playstyles available on either of them, which I think is exactly what you want out of your weapon kits. I think you want to allow for diversity of playstyles, and they've really succeeded with these ones. So this is the point sensor and missiles one. Heavy support playstyle. You get a decent amount of paint for a decent amount of missiles. You can still shark in the paint that you create, which is really powerful right now, which is a big reason I'm thinking as much as I am about the brushes. And it has the location ability that you get out of, say, a Sea Blaster that lets you just locate everyone on the map and make it so that every fight is informed. And as if that weren't enough, you also have missiles to provide you extra information on top of the people who are marked. So this is really annoying to fight into, not for the weapon itself, but for the fact that its team will always see you while it's out there, and it's a sharking weapon that paints a lot, so you might not see it coming. And that's something that can be hard to push against. It's like this hidden factor in a match that's making life more difficult for the entire enemy team. I think there's a lot of supportive power there. The Zuka kit here is more for like midline fighting sort of stuff, where you have the wall to give yourself a little bit of independence, in the sense that you don't have to commit as hard to a fight. You can actually put out a wall, try the fight, decide you don't like it, and just leave. Whereas a lot of the time with Paintbrush, you're either in there and winning, or you're in there and you're dead, and there's no in between. This gives you a little bit more of an in between, and it gives you Azuka, which can help you deal with longer range threats. So this is more of like a tactical fight with the team kind of weapon. This is more of a give your team a ton of utility. And then this is the Hyperdive brush. This is the only one that Tormy plays. This is the one that lets you move the fastest, and moving the fastest means that you can get into places that you might be annoying in. It also gives you a really fast special that you can deploy and then be done with, so that you can go back to fighting again. It gives you the location ability. So all of those kits are really different from each other, and it's super cool that people who play Paintbrush get to play all those different styles because of the way they've designed those kits. I'll go through all of these brushes here, and then I'll talk about why they're in this particular tier. So this V ink brush is kind of the more traditional run around, be a little bit annoying, and try to use your whale by running around them in a circle kind of thing. Get a lot of attention and just distract them, threaten flanks, and you have a bomb to poke with if you're kept at range, so that you can have an impact even in a situation where your weapon isn't being allowed to play the game. The nice thing about this brush is that it has Hammer, and Hammer is a really valuable special to have on a flanking weapon. It's part of the reason why we like this guy so much, that you don't want someone who has Hammer to be somewhere you can't keep track of. So that's the big advantage of this one, and these are the most maneuverable brushes, which makes them most zippy and zoopy and difficult to pin down. The Octo brushes, you're kind of playing mostly for kit when comparing them to the ink brushes. They're not quite as maneuverable as the ink brushes are, so they can't do as much zipping and zooping. But they can do a little bit more of what the paintbrushes do, which is sitting in a good AoE position and being able to hit over the top of stuff or down over ledges or something like that. One of these, for example, on top of the inkblot stacks, you don't want to mess with. And it's really the kits that define these. The reason that I've got this specific one lower is just that Zipcaster is a lot weaker right now. The Octo brushes, you tend to see a little bit more playing the Sharking playstyle. Just a little bit better of damage per swing, and a little bit more range can help with that sometimes. But they can all do that sort of thing. And being able to put yourself in position for a flank better is often more valuable than the flank itself actually being more likely to succeed. So it really just depends on what specials are you looking for in those situations. Now, why do I have the brushes in this tier? I think they're in the best place they've been in a little while. The thing is, I think about okay, why would I want to learn how to play brush? Is there a reason that I would prefer, as someone who traditionally plays one of these weapons, to learn brush because it gives me so much more of a competitive advantage? Am I having a moment like I had with the Sea Blaster where I'm like, wait, I don't play this weapon and I'm still doing better? And I don't think that there's anyone above that is having that experience with brushes. They're better than they've been, and if you're a brush player, you're probably in a pretty happy state right now. There's a lot of sharking weapons, and these are relatively high paint output when they do decide to paint. So a lot of special options. It's really looking pretty solid for the brushes at this moment in time. And the fact that Dynamo might be a thing means that there is a slot for brush that is uniquely filled very well by the brushes. Just, that is a niche situation, and I can't see cases where you'd switch onto brush specifically for brush. So that's why I'm leaving it down here for now. But I could see its stocks rising if any strategy that's using these starts to see really good top-level results. These are here because I put this charger up here. The chargers, I didn't mention it before, but in general, they have to play a lot more aggressively to be able to succeed here. They need to not be playing their full range against most of the backlines, because a lot of the backlines will bully them out. You've got bow and pencil in frequent use right now. E-liter isn't that uncommon. And so you really need to be able to justify the lack of range, relatively speaking, with either the kit or with the mobility or like something like that. So that's not always an easy sell, but I think VAC might be worth it. And these other two, you know, if you're going to play the one, might as well at least experiment with the others. But I think Crab on a Charger is just a little too redundant, but yeah, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe that ends up being more valuable than I think because Crab is doing better than it's been recently. And we talked about this already. Like I said, you're probably not going to use it too much unless you have a blaster and need a cooler. That's pretty much the only case that I ever find myself thinking about this. Otherwise, you're probably talking either one of these two for the kind of backline rock, paper, scissors thing, or you're taking a more aggressive blaster, like one of these or your Sea Blaster. Okay. We're going to try and go a little bit more quickly because we're already an hour and 40 minutes in. This has already been very long. But I think I have less to say about these and their position in the game, so hopefully we can do that. Mini, like I said, bit of a fall from grace. These specials are the ones that people are more interested in having most of the time than Zuka, which is why I'm dropping this down into it's not its time right now. When Mini was strong, we were seeing plenty of this. I think we're seeing less of it now, especially as they move on to heavy, but even then, we would probably grab one of these two minis over this one, in all likelihood. Tetras are in a kind of sad state right now because there are a lot of factors that I think would make Tetras strong right now. The fact that time to kill weapons are leaving, they're less in the meta than they were before, and the fact that it can traverse enemy ink with dodge rolls. What I can't get over here, though, is that this weapon also has a very slow TTK, and this thing getting sharked isn't necessarily saving it. Like its dodge rolls aren't necessarily saving it. Its ability to shoot while dodge rolling isn't necessarily saving it because it takes so long to zero someone out. It used to be that you used dualies against blasters because you could see what direction the blaster was committing their shot to and dodge roll out of the way. These dodge rolls are not far enough to be able to do that. You needed one of maybe like these dualies to get that far away from them. This, you kind of have to use multiple dodge rolls, even just to dodge one shot, often takes too long. The fact that you're hard to hit with like a really good aiming weapon like a shooter or something, that's not necessarily helping you against the AoE of a blaster. So I think that it's harder to use a weapon that's trying to waste your time, that's trying to make you miss shots right now. You're going to run out of room to work with quickly. They're going to exhaust your dodge rolls and then be able to pick you up once you're out of resources. Because even though it's a slower pace of play, that doesn't mean you can just dive in and automatically get value. So I'm pretty pessimistic on Tetras right now, especially since I play this and I need to hit 2 shots and they need to hit 4. But I might be underrating this a little bit. I could see arguments to put it higher than it is right now. I've been seeing a lot of people mess with the new L3, and my take on this is I feel like they're trying to get the hang of it more than they're trying to actually use the L3. The one thing that L3 has tended to pop up for in competitive play has never been fighting. It has always been paint spamming and farming a lot of a certain special. And this weapon, now that it's been nerfed for specifically that playstyle, I feel like it has less of a niche than it did. Also, this thing's ability to paint for itself to swim is terrible. You generally need to fire 2 shots to get a really consistent line of paint in front of you. Two bursts is such a slow amount of... it's so slow for it to be able to move. Not a great look for it. So I've been seeing some strong players use it, and maybe there's something here that I'm not considering about it. This is the version of it that I've been seeing most people using. I'm not sold on it. I will need to see more results out of it before I look at it and say I understand, I get it. But also, I'm partly putting it down here just because I'm mad that Splattershot didn't get its kit. Anyway, Flingza has never been a bad weapon. I've said this basically every tier list. It's totally fine. You can shark with it. You can do long-range support things with it. Missiles have never been bad. It's just like, there's a lot of stuff that people are picking over it, but you could totally play it and make it work, and I think it would have staying power. Just a lot of people are thinking other stuff more valuable than it right now. This is Reef Slider and Wall. This is the other one that I feel like this could go up if you want a lot of Reef Sliders. It's not the one I'm tending to see the most, but I could see it just because Reef Slider is stronger. When this released, it was a hilariously bad kit for it. But I think it's come up a lot in the world since then just because of Reef Slider suddenly being good. God, I want this weapon to be good. It's so fun. It's Crapid, but it has Inkjet. It's a lot of things that I liked from Splatoon 2. But Inkjet, not super popular right now. If you're running a Rapid, then chances are you need some other long-range weapon with it. So now that means, where's your aggression coming from? It's not the highest paint output weapon, so it's not quite its time right now, but it's not too bad either. Explo is like so close to viable because Bow is very similar to the way that Explo plays, and Bow's playstyle has never been better, but I think that it just gets outclassed by Bow for everything that it wants to do, and it's really easy to mess with. Like, this weapon is too easy to bully, it's too easy to stop from doing what it wants to do. It has to position so safely to not get arrows shot at its feet, to not get caught out by a frontline weapon that's trying to push it, and a lot of the time it can end up having less of an impact than you'd want it to. But Splashdown is actually a pretty solid thing for it. I was skeptical of it at first, but I think that it gives it at least like a burst of paint on the zone, at least a little bit of a get off me tool to threaten someone with, especially if you damaged them earlier and you want to combo with something over the ledge to finish it. That can be an option. So that's not bad. And then Point Sensor, like we've discussed, is very strong right now. So this kit isn't super bad for that either. Same problem, I'd say, with this, where I like this for getting a special that I think is better, and I don't think that Splashdown is quite as important as Inkvac. So I put it down a little bit lower. I think the main weapon's lack of fighting power is really holding it back. And the fact that so many weapons that fight better also outrange it that are being picked right now. Glugas just seem like right on the cusp of viability all the time, and I've never really seen them break out. I think the low fire rate is just really difficult for people to overcome and want to deal with. It's just not quite a good enough fighting weapon for people to want to pick it. It's not going to paint well enough for people to want to pick it for that. I'd rather just have a 52 and sacrifice the better special for the ability to more reliably kill things. Similar problem with the Dualie Squelchers in that it's just really slow TTK, and with there being a lot of sharking weapons right now and not as many fighting weapons, there's like not that much for this weapon to even kite. It's a little bit ink hungry, which hurts its ability to paint, and the game is just not designed for what this weapon wants to do. Luna, The problem is Zipcaster. Like, if you're going to run a Luna, you're probably going to run this Luna over here. And this one, even though it's the second kit of a weapon that's good, the Zipcaster is really hard to use right now, and it's probably not something that anyone's going to be prioritizing. This is even more of a paint bot than the Neo Splash was, but it doesn't create as many explosions, so it's very, very niche, the situations you would ever want to use this. I'm sure there are some that someone can think up where it might actually be the best weapon for the job, but it's going to need to be a pretty creative person to come up with that kind of idea. It's not something I've been seeing very much. It's something I've been seeing people experiment with. It looks cool, but also you need a very supportive mindset to make all of this work. Toxic Mist is powerful. Inkstorm is not a bad special at all, but would you want that combination over all of these other things? It's hard for me to make a case, so I'm putting it down here right now. The Brellas, these are still in an okay spot compared to where they were, but I think the demand for skirmishers is lower in that there are just fewer weapons fighting. What we like about something like Wiper is that it can get into the enemy side and draw attention to itself, and it has the mobility to maybe get itself out. I think one of the big advantages Wiper has over the Tetras is that the Tetras, they may have burst movement, but they don't have sustained movement. It's harder for them to escape when they do dive in, whereas the Wiper can just kind of keep things at bay and stay in there for longer. But the Brellas, they're a very immobile kind of skirmishing. They're going to draw attention, but they're going to need the rest of the team to pile in, and that's not really the sort of meta that we're in right now, and it doesn't synergize super well with a lot of the stuff that we're seeing played at the moment. So I've been seeing less of this recently, but it's still totally something you have to respect, and you have to play the right way when it is on the enemy team. Same kind of thing with sloshing machines. I've been seeing these creep up a little bit more in use. This is closer to a meta that they like, where it's about zoning area denial. That is what they do well. I think there are other options that people are preferring to do that, but it's a situation where they can work. So they get a little bit of a boost. And I just don't know what's going to become a foil squeezer, just because there's so many tournament situations where you can't use it for the screen. So this one's going to kind of be in limbo for a while, even though certainly not a bad main weapon. Okay, now we're in. These aren't terrible, but there are better options, I think. This particular tent, I don't feel like I see the value of chumps for it. Chumps, like, one of the big advantages is that they block shots and also do damage. And the tent doesn't need anything to block shots for it, so that's already something. I guess, if someone does actually stay in the chumps to fight you, then it makes it more likely for you to one-shot things, but you could say that about anything that has chumps. I don't think people are going to want to stay there, especially if they see a tent pushing into that area. The tent is more going to want to draw attention to itself, and putting chumps down on an area automatically makes that an area that you don't want to pay attention to. I guess maybe you fire chumps somewhere else and then take up the space that they get funneled into. Maybe that's the thought process. I think you get more immediate value out of either of the other two specials that you have available. So that's why I put it there. Aerospray, I have been seeing... This is probably the highest I've placed Aerospray in a while. Like, I want to reflect that Aerospray is doing better in current meta. I also do think that there are better paint spam short-range shooters. This gold Aerospray just cannot hold ground for itself to save its life. It needs its entire team working to keep people off it for it to be able to paint anything. And it does paint a lot when it has that space, and it does get Booyah, which is useful. You can be paint spamming on zone or something and try to be working against the heavy maybe and trying to use the paint it gives you to throw Booyah bombs back at it or something. But it can't really fight for itself very well. And the silver is a little bit better, but not by much. You do have a damaging bomb, if not like a technically lethal bomb, in the Fizzy. And Reef Slider is your one kind of get out of jail free card. Fighting this weapon, instead of being like, I can always fight it, you're now thinking, I can fight this thing as long as it doesn't have Reef and I have an angle. If it has Reef, then you have to respect it a little bit more. And that's where I might see this one getting used. I just don't think this weapon is as good. I almost want to put it lower. But because of the metagame situation that we're in right now, I feel like it's got something. If you want to play Tetris, play the other kit because Zipcaster's not great right now. These Dualies, I don't really see much of a niche for them. Like, Junior isn't even that much worse at fighting than these are. And being able to dodge roll from like inside the bubble seems situational at best. It's just kind of a weird combination of things to have. These kind of like aggressive Dualies combined with this very supportive special. And we navigate that somewhat with these Dualies up here, but even the Crab Tank, you know, it is putting out damage. It is stopping people. Whereas the bubble is more meant to enable the rest of the team to be able to move up or to lock in a space that you want to fight in. You could already dodge roll through enemy ink, so locking in that space isn't as important for this weapon as for like other main weapons would be. I don't know. It feels like a mismatch to me. This is probably the weakest kit of Carbon. I mean, they're both down here. Zip synergizes pretty well with Carbon in that whenever it gets somewhere, it can put out bursts of damage really quick and follow up on its own Zip. Zip is, of course, not in a great state right now, but Chumps, like, why would you want to run support Carbon Roller? That's kind of what it's there to do. It's to put out utility. It doesn't really help it kill things until it runs into its own Chumps, which is a multiple second process of setting up. I don't know. There's some synergy there, but it seems to be like not super favored, and this kit up here is already basically perfect for it. It gives it all the ability it needs to play against a midline weapon, against a backline weapon, but also to shark the crap out of a frontline weapon. And it has a damage combo that works really well with its main weapon that makes it a really fast kill time. So, I don't know. I don't see it. Dually Squelchers, we've already said that there are problems with the main weapon and its focus here, but this one gets Screen, which same problem we talked about with Foil Squeezer. Screen is something that you might get banned from using, so might not be as valuable to you. There's not a great reason to use this Splatling. A Splatling that gets Crab almost feels like a waste. Obviously, the Crab's a bit better, but you probably get most of the value from the main weapon, and not being able to get Cooler takes away one of its biggest niches. The fact that this got Cooler was like the only reason I have it up here. Otherwise, it'd be a lot lower because of the paint output being beatable by other weapons and the range being pretty mediocre for anything that's going to try and anchor. I don't know why you'd want to use this kit over the other two. That's about all I have to say about it. The kits just make such a bigger difference. These are specials you'd rather farm over this one. So that's all I have to say about it. Rebrellas are interesting because on one hand, there are some people who are pushing these and trying to see what they can do with them. It doesn't necessarily convince me yet that they're super strong. The damage consistency is the big selling point on these because that's something that Brella players don't tend to have. But the shield is flimsy enough that it feels not super worth it. You really have to use a very tight window to hit a very specific kind of damage combo to be able to splat reliably with them. Otherwise, you're kind of just wasting the enemy team's time, and you're not wasting it as much as you could with another Brella or a Tent or something like that. So it's like, do you really want a splashdown on a Brella that bad? Do you really want a bubble on a Brella that bad? I'm not sold on them yet, but I could see a case being made that at some point there's some strength to them that merits using in some niche use case. Gold Dynamo might deserve to go a little bit higher than this, but I'm drinking the haterade today. I'm making sure that people are mad at me, so that's why it's down here. Custom Hydra, we've talked about the problems of screen and how it makes it difficult to use a weapon, and we already have a couple of kits of Hydra that have pretty decent specials, so I don't really see much of a reason to want to use this one. Fresh Squiffer, I mean, if you want a trick shot, go for it, but Zipcaster is in as bad of a state as it's been, so you probably want to go with the other Squiffer instead. These Glugas, I think part of what makes the blue Glugas work as well as they do is the wall, that you basically have like a budget 52 gal. This doesn't have the wall, and so it's very out in the open, very honest, and difficult to fight with compared to what you've got over here. Like, your low fire rate here makes it so that, like, if you miss shots, it's very punishing, except this one gets to miss shots from behind a wall, which is inherently safer than missing shots out in the open. This is the one that gets Hammer, which this needed to get nerfed for specific cases where people were just hammer spamming, and since it has been nerfed, they've tried to make it more of a fighting weapon, and I don't buy it. I just don't. I don't think this weapon's going to resurface until something happens to the main weapon. S-Blast, this is not a bad weapon. It's just, this is such a good weapon that I never see people using this. But if you want a Reef Slider, I mean, I guess you could put it out there. Just the Burst Bomb in combination with it makes it more than just, oh, this is just another kit of a good weapon, because the Burst Bomb is, like, huge for it being able to finish its food. Big Swigs, I am more of a hater on these than some people. I think there's some people, especially looking at planets right now, that are trying to make it work, and I just am not convinced. I've played against a lot of players who I will acknowledge are, like, better at the game than me, and I did not feel frightened by their Big Swigs. I think that Big Swig is just too weak of a fighting weapon. It paints a lot, and that it can provide a lot of valuable utility, but I don't think that any of these individual kits provide so much utility in the way that something like, I don't know, that Paintbrush kit, for example, or, you know, what's Dapples or something like that. I don't think they're giving that much utility. They're just outputting a lot of paint. And there are plenty of things that output a lot of paint that aren't necessarily very strong. So I think they're in that boat for now. They're not awful, for sure. You have to acknowledge that there are some strengths. There are some good damage combos. There are some things about them that work. But at the end of the day, if I can just run at the thing and expect to win, provided it doesn't notice me immediately and start pre-firing, like, I don't know. I don't want to be able to just lose my support weapon because someone decided to kill it. I want them to have some way of, like, getting away from that, or some way to fight back while I'm trying to get there and, you know, back them up. Same problem with screen here. I really want to experiment with this 52. I just don't feel good about using screen, especially in, like, public lobbies where I can't ask people if it's okay for me to use that. And in a comp lobby, I'd probably rather, if I'm going to be playing a 52, just be using the one that I know works for me. So I haven't been able to put a lot of hours into this, even though I've been playing a lot of 52 recently. But it's something that's been on my mind to give a shot, and maybe it's better than I think it is. Like I said, though, with screen being what it is, it's not seeing use reliably anytime soon. Ballpoint, I believe what people are saying is that it's just not quite strong enough as a main weapon right now, but that this is also a main weapon that's very easy to break if they give it too much of a buff, so it's in a rough spot. I think the fact that this one has Inkjet is going to keep it down here until Inkjet is doing a little bit better. But I'm definitely interested in the Nouveau, like I mentioned before. So I think that it has some advantages, and the Fizzy Bomb is a really weird but really actually useful addition to the kit. And even if it's not going to use it very much, it's still the kind of sub-weapon that it can get some use out of. So definitely, we've talked a lot about what its strengths were back when it was meta. It's in the running, but right now, Inkjet plus other main weapons are kind of keeping it down. Red Pencil, I don't know why you would ever use it, because if you're going to use a pencil, just use the one that has cooler and pile all of the utility on top instead of just some of the utility. Like, you're just not going to get as much out of an Inkstorm most of the time as you are out of a cooler. So you're going to run it, just run that. Wiper Deco, also, it's a very, very supportive, slow playstyle, which is not what this main weapon is good at doing. This main weapon wants to be able to get up in some annoying corner that you can't get it out of, and it's too fast for you to pin down, and oh my god, get this thing off me. And this just has no tools to assist it with doing that. Beacons get it and other teammates in, but that's supportive utility. That's not something that's helping itself. That's not a selfish tool that it can use in the moment to get itself around a corner or something, or to find an opponent or something like that. Missiles are good for a standard front-to-back team fight, but this is not a weapon that's really trying to like initiate those team fights. It's trying to already be in the enemy team's way. So I think there's a pretty significant mismatch between this weapon's kit and what its main weapon wants to do. Kraken Roller, I mean, it can get itself out of a situation that might normally trade with the Kraken. It has beacons that it can jump to. This is a very counterplayable weapon, though. It has no poking tools whatsoever at anything longer ranged. So when people know how to play their range, this weapon doesn't get to play the game. You just paint your corners, don't get sharked. As long as that happens, this weapon will never hit you. The Carbon Deco has a Burst Bomb. That's a tool that lets it poke at things when it's not able to find a way in yet. This just doesn't have that, so a lot weaker. If you want to farm a lot of Inkjets, this weapon used to be the one that you used for that. Then they added the Bulb's Tri-Stringer to the game. Spamming a bunch of Inkjets isn't a particularly strong idea right now, but if you're going to do it, instead of doing it with the wimpiest short-range shooter that has ever been added to the game, one that has terrible accuracy, a slow fire rate, at least compared to like an arrow spray, and still needs 5 shots, why not pick this backline weapon that is the terror of the game right now? The one that is forcing a lot of North American players to rethink the way that they play to be able to counterplay it. The Inkjet spam was all this had going for it already, so that didn't put it very high, but now that even that niche is better filled by something else, its stocks are dropping. What is this doing down here? This is actually seeing... Okay. I'm going to take this, and I'm going to bump it up to... I'll put it up here for now. This is a little bit conservative. This weapon has been seeing a lot of use in Area Cup. It is a very high paint output weapon that's seeing use on zones because it's able to just spam the zones with its entire kit and be able to cap really fast. So in paint spam situations, that's where you tend to see these weapons taking off a little bit more. I like I've described, I think that there are really huge liabilities in terms of its fighting power. But I'm going to put it up here because we've been seeing some use from that, and that's worth recognizing. Okay. Coming back down. GooTubers, they haven't really changed. They just haven't addressed these weapons. They have the same weaknesses that they've always had. I've talked about them a bunch of times. Hammer's better than it used to be. Missiles are still pretty solid. And missiles plus torpedoes, not a bad kit. Just not that much of a reason to use them. They have use cases that, you know, they won't be bad in. You still have to respect them. But they're also not preferable to what else you've got. Very similar to the Squiffer problem, where there are just a lot of weapons that bully a shorter range charger out of position, and the loss of uptime isn't worth the loss of range. Sploosh. This one, I could see this one being a little bit higher. Like, it's a sharking weapon, and it's something that gets hammer, which is very disruptive. You have to pay attention to it. Just, it takes up a slot on the comp that's very awkward to have taken up, where in order to account for this, you need some frontline fighting power. You need maybe a little bit more paint output, because this just doesn't have the painting range. It's really trying to flank more than it's trying to paint anything useful. And so to play alongside this, you need to run a comp of weapons that's very specifically formulated to allow it to work, and that's just hard to justify. So I wouldn't rate it very highly, even though, again, like we said, like sharking and flanking right now are pretty solid strategies. This one, I'd say there are better options for it. I'd probably rather have something like a brush, I think, than this. When I put it here, this might be lowballing it. I might want to put it... Yeah. I think Outclassed describes it better than it's not its time right now. Like, I think there are other options. I'd probably rather have an Inkbrush Nouveau than have this at this point in time. I'm conflicted, though. This reef, probably seeing the least use out of the bunch. Missiles are not, like, super duper important at the moment, so we're preferring something like a reef slider or a booyah bomb. And the sub-weapon is probably the least useful of the bunch. Like, who needs this thing to be running forward fast? Like, why is it rushing the enemy team down? I don't see it. Rapid with strikes. Strikes are definitely not bad. There are a lot of specials right now that strikes can beat that are common and annoying. So it might be something you run as a counter if you already have like a rapid blaster and you want them to be switching off. I'm having to come up with so many different disclaimers, though, for like what the exact situation needs to be, that I'm like, is this even niche, or is this just kind of not that great? That's kind of where I'm thinking about it. But it's, again, not dog water. It's not the worst. Just not seeing a lot of use because there's so many other options. So the main weapon of the Dowsers turns out to be a little bit underwhelming. The range is very good, but there are a lot of other weapons that have similar range that are much more reliable in terms of damage, especially with the backlines that we're running right now. So not a ton of paint output, not super reliable paint output on that long range. Like it takes a while to fill a whole line of it. And with only one dodge roll, it's a long one for sure, but it's also pretty committed to the dodge roll. It's awkward sometimes in smaller maps. You run into walls a lot. You may run off ledges you don't want to if you try to dodge roll. So not in the best place in terms of the main weapon. For the fire rate that you do get out of it, you know, if you're trying to play it as a Slayer, you probably just pick like one of these or something, or like the end parries. If you're trying to play it for a support, then you've got things like you could run like a 96 and get better specials than really either of these are going to have for what it's trying to do. So yeah, I don't know. I'm not seeing it. Chumps Zap. Chumps are relatively strong right now, but since they're on so many like backline painting weapons, you don't need a frontline painting weapon. You don't need like a support weapon grabbing them. I guess you might slot this in if you're trying to do like a double Chumps comp and you don't want to have like Dynamo Bow. If you want to just have like Bow Zap or Dynamo Zap, I guess that's the way that you would get it. But again, like you probably just run Dynamo for that and then run the cooler Zap instead. So I'm not seeing this get used, even though its special is very strong right now, which is making me put it pretty low. It makes me think that's outclassed because of that usage pattern. The other H3s, again, these do paint a lot, but they don't paint so much that you're willing to consider the poor fighting power for just the specials that they're getting. So generally not going to see these. This L3, again, gets crab, paints for it decently well, but not as well as it used to because of its older brother over here. So you're going to pick maybe one of these for a crab instead, or even this over it. This kit, I had to look up what the kit was because it's just been so long since I've seen it. Like, Toxic Mist isn't bad, Inkstorm isn't bad, but none of them are preferable right now, and they're definitely not worth taking a weapon that's got such a slow TTK just to take up all of the paint on the map to paint for Inkstorms. They're just more high-impact utility weapons in the game that don't get bullied out as hard as this one do. So we're not going to see this for some time. We're going to need to see some kind of change to the game state, I think, before those are going to be super liked. This is a huge kit mismatch. I've got this way further down than like second kit on good weapons because I just don't see a reason to want this to be something that you pop on this particular weapon. So the thing about the other blaster kits is that they have location tools. They have tools like point sensor and autobomb that let you know where an opponent is. Those are really powerful. This one doesn't. It has a beacon, which is a very supportive sub-weapon that you don't want to run on something this aggressive, because if you're going to run something aggressive, you want to give it tools to be aggressive. The other big problem with it having that is that that's very ink hungry, and this is a weapon that all of its shots take up a lot of ink, so you're not going to have very much uptime if you're trying to use those before you go out and take a fight or something. So it likes having beacons on its team, but it would much rather have something else pick them. I think that's a little bit of a mismatch. What's a bigger mismatch is having Crab Tank. I just don't see a blaster ever wanting to put itself in a position where the Crab Tank is useful. At least with the Splash, even though it's short range, it can throw burst bombs from up above. But a blaster likes low ground a lot of the time. A blaster wants to have its face shoved right into the ledge, hitting people over the top of it. And that's exactly the wrong position to be popping a crab in. It has to go so far out of its way and doesn't have that much in the way of mobility to get it there. It doesn't have a lot to combo with its own damage, because if you damage something with the main weapon of a blaster, popping a crab in that position is not the right thing to do. They're just going to be too close to you for that to be what you're trying to do at that moment. So I think there's just not a good kit for blaster put together on that. Bloblobber is awkward because it does paint a lot, but it also has a pretty poor fighting range. What I mean by that is that if you're far enough away from the Bloblobber, you can see the projectiles coming and just dodge on reaction. They're that slow. The projectile speed has always limited this weapon to either going for crazy aggressive like frontline plays where you have to hit all 4 projectiles of the slosh to be able to get away with them, or sitting back and being really boring and just painting constantly. There are weapons that get more value out of painting, a lot of them. You get more value from the pen, you get more value from the heavy. You can more reliably paint your teammates' feet on those weapons than this one, which has to predict where the teammates are going to be like a second in advance. And they also have more kill threat on the opponents than this does. Plus, they have more range. So there's really not that much of a niche right now for the Bloblobber. The only way to make it more than a weaker version of a paint bot is to play it hyper aggressively. And if you're trying to play hyper aggressively, there are so many weapons that are going to get you more value than a Bloblobber for that. So there are people who are pushing it. There are people who are one-tricking it. It's not dog water, like we said, but I don't see a reason to pick it specifically unless you like the weapon. And then Foil Fling's a similar issue to all the others that have screen, plus the other version of it that's doing better isn't in that good of a spot either. So it's down a little bit on the lower side. Eyebrow raise, if used in comp. These are something that I'm like, why? I mean, sure, I guess. And then both eyebrows raised if used in comp, like, bro, what are you doing? So C Junior, the nice thing about the other Junior is that it has a lethal bomb, and that lethal bomb lets it get itself into and out of some situations it wouldn't be able to get into otherwise. It's a poking tool that's much more reliable at actually displacing the enemy team. It's something you have to respect. Torpedo is a location tool. It's something that can put down a decent amount of paint if it ever goes off and doesn't get shot, which you should always be shooting torpedoes. It's not something that's going to get very reliable value. It's something that is often just going to be a waste of your ink from your ink tank to throw because someone's just going to shoot it and all you get is maybe some information. So not anywhere near as reliable. It doesn't even have great damage combos with it if it rolls it. So sure, you can spam a whole bunch of projectiles in the air with this thing because it's got the bigger ink tank to be able to throw them with, but that's not something that generally works at a high level. Like, people are just gonna have the aim ability to shoot those out of the sky, and once you've got that out of the way, this is just a relatively poor ranged painting weapon that's painting for one of the weaker specials in the game. There are some use cases for Wavebreaker, but just farming to spam the Wavebreaker itself is not the winning strategy. Really, with the heavy, the Wavebreaker is what you're spending to farm what you actually want. You are popping the special to get more ink in your tank, whereas here you would be using the ink in your tank to get the special. So this is just underwhelming in every aspect of its kit and in the combination of all of those things. And there's not going to be much of a reason to use it until some aspect of any of the kit gets buffed. Clash Blaster. Now, if you're going to play Clash, play this one. This is the better kit of Clash. I've had people try to argue otherwise. I mean, chumps are in a good place right now, but this is just not the same kill threat as this. And you need extra kill threat from the kit because the weapon is not giving it to you. The main weapon tickles unless you are hitting double directs, and if you're hitting double directs on this weapon, just hit single directs on this weapon. That's a very, very niche use case for hitting around corners, and since blaster hitboxes got buffed recently, you need that even less on all of the other kits of the weapon. So very slow kill time. This is a beginner-friendly weapon in that you barely have to aim it at all, and it has a higher fire rate than all the other blasters do. Once you get past beginner level, this is going to fall off hard, and you're going to be relying heavily, heavily, heavily on Splat Bomb and Zuka. When you don't even have that to rely on, I don't know what you're doing with your time. Nova is... It's a beacon merchant. It's there to farm as many beacons as possible. It gets a very underwhelming special, and so you're sacrificing a main weapon because this main weapon is probably the worst main weapon in the entire game. I'm trying to think. I guess there's Undercover Brella, but it's a hard argument. It's one of the weakest main weapons to ever be in any Splatoon game. Just such an abysmally slow kill time, and not even that good of paint to offset it. And what you're farming for with that paint is a pretty underwhelming special. Like, the special is absolutely the weakest part of the 52 Gal's kit. The reason we like the 52 Gal is that it has that insane kill time behind a splash wall. And this does not have either of those things. This can let you know where the enemy team is pretty reliably and keep that up. And that's good. That's value. But you get so much more out of even something like this, and especially out of something like this. So it is more than outclassed. I just don't see a reason ever to use this thing at this point. Especially since, like, you know, oh, what about the opening gambit stuff? Every weapon has opening gambit now. It's called Aura. We are in a post 11.0.0 patch. This weapon is not useful. Neo Splash. Neo Splash, I guess you're playing this to try and backcap. You're playing this to try and take the enemy side and, like, put beacons there and be an annoying sharking threat that can maybe use whale somehow, sometimes. But we already have a beacon placer that's a short-range sharking weapon that also gives you a much more useful special, so there's not much of a reason to use this thing. Plus, this one has dodge rolls in addition to its fast TTK. So being able to swim a little bit faster for that roll, not really worth considering. This arrow spray, again, screen, and spamming screen kind of feels like an evil thing to do a little bit. Like, obviously, like, if everyone's cool with screen being played, then fair play, but, like, just, like, I don't know why to pick this. Then you've got undercovers, which are perennially weak because of the main weapon. Now, the Reef Slider version, definitely not that bad, in that you do have to respect the Reef Slider, just like you do with this. But you have this if you just want to spam Reef Slider. You have this if you want to play aggressive and spam Reef Slider and have, like, skirmishing ability and have a little bit more range and still have a better kill time. You've got this if you want to spam Reef Slider and you want some AoE damage and you want to be able to hit from a much further range away. There are many other options than deciding to go undercover Brella for it. This kit doesn't even have that much, and I don't really know why you would want to use it, but at least it's better than this one. This one, at least, maybe you get a little bit of information out of the whale. Maybe you... I'm having trouble justifying this, guys. Like, it's one of the weakest main weapons in the game. It has been for a very long time. And then this one gets screen, which isn't even particularly helping it that much. It's like, ooh, watch out. I'm going to shark in with my undercover Brella. They're not going to see me coming as I walk forward slowly with the Brella raised. Torpedo's not bad for it as a location tool, but if all you're bringing something for is a torpedo, I mean, even this weapon is better. You've also got this. Like, just so many other options that don't require you to play an undercover Brella. So if you're playing an undercover Brella, it's because you want to play an undercover Brella, and nothing I say is going to sway you. Ugh. God, that was long. There's a long discussion of the metagame at the beginning of it that, I don't know, maybe I have to cut that out, or maybe I just put a 2-hour and 30-minute video on YouTube. Maybe that's the thing I do. Who's to say? You know what I decided to do with this now that you are watching, but I'll have to figure it out. Thanks for watching, everybody, and feel free to get angry at me in the comments and inform me about things I am more than happy to be nerded out at and to learn more about the game that way. Goodbye!